Welcome, race fans, to Pump the Brakes, the one, the only, the Cadillac of Formula One podcast. I am your host, the Pit Lane Patriot. We have a double feature of races. This weekend, we have got the Canadian Grand Prix, and we will go over every single thing about it, as well as our Team Cadillac and a little Indianapolis 500. Race week is back. And thank God, because the break is over and we're heading into one of the best weekends on the calendar, the Canadian Grand Prix. This is one of those races that always feels alive. It feels fast, it feels chaotic, it's got history, it's got walls. So this week, before we get into Cadillac, the wider grid, and everything else, let's set the table properly for Canada. The track, the history, the weekend format, and most importantly, why Montreal feels like a race where something can happen.
Here come the lights. The Canadian Grand Prix is underway. George Russell gets the launch off the line that he was looking for.
All right, so first things first. What makes Canada feel like Canada? The race takes place at Circuit Gilles Villeneuve in Montreal, on the man-made island of Parc Jean-Drapier. I cannot pronounce that. And it's one of those circuits that drivers and fans seem to genuinely love for the same reason. It punishes mistakes and rewards commitment. The current layout is 4.361 kilometers. It has 14 corners, and the Grand Prix runs for 70 laps. It's a low downforce, stop-start circuit with heavy braking zones, big traction moments, and walls close enough to make every little error feel expensive. And that track personality is a huge part of why this race always stands out. Canada isn't one of those places where the laps just flow into one elegant rhythm like Suzuka or even Silverstone. Montreal is more like a test of nerve and control. Brake hard, ride the curbs, straighten the exits, don't get greedy near the walls, and survive the final chicane without introducing yourself to the most famous piece of concrete on the circuit. Because yes, this is the home of the Wall of Champions. So for those who don't know, the Wall of Champions, the wall at the exit of the last chicane that got its name after Damon Hill, Michael Schumacher, and namesake Jacques Villeneuve all found their way into the wall during the 1999 weekend. And the thing I like about Canada is that the circuit's character matches the race's reputation. Montreal tends to produce weekends that feel a little unstable in a good way. Like you'll have things like safety cars, strategy swings, weather threats, which is very possible this year, walls, brake wear, and drivers overcommitting because the lap rewards aggression. This lap wants you to push the limit. It's one of those events where even if the front of the field looks settled on paper, the race itself can still get weird fast. And that's part of what makes it so good. Historically, this race has had real weight too. The Canadian Grand Prix has been part of Formula One since the 1960s, but Montreal first hosted it in 1978. And that first race at the new venue was won by none other than Gilles Villeneuve himself, his first Formula One victory. After Villeneuve's death in 1982, the circuit was renamed in his honor, which makes the whole place have a little bit more gravity. This isn't just another modern venue dropped onto the calendar. This is a circuit with real memory attached to it, real history. And then you get to the winners list, and Canada has one of those nice little records that tells you exactly how serious this place is. Lewis Hamilton and Michael Schumacher each have 7 wins here, which is the all-time driver record for the event. So Lewis Hamilton and Michael Schumacher are tied for 7 wins here, the same way they're tied for 7 world titles. More recently, Max Verstappen won in 2022, 2023, and 2024. Red Bull has basically turned this place into their own personal summer cottage. That's part of why the 2026 version feels interesting. Because the sport coming into Canada now looks very different from the one Verstappen dominated here a couple years ago. Because this year Canada is a sprint weekend, and that always changes the feel of everything. The schedule is basically Friday, you've got free practice 1 in the morning, then you go straight to sprint qualifying, then Saturday, you got your sprint in the morning, then regular qualifying, and then Sunday you got the race. So we had it just like Miami with the same time zone and everything. So if you remember Miami and remember the times for that, it's the same. And that's a big deal in Canada specifically. And also, just like Miami, there's not much time to slowly figure things out. There's only one practice and then straight into things that matter for points. And that's a big deal in Canada specifically, because this is not the kind of track where you want to be guessing. Montreal's hard on confidence. If the car isn't settled on the brakes, if the driver doesn't trust the rear on the traction, if the setup is a little off over the curbs, the lap can start falling apart very quickly. So a sprint weekend here adds a little extra tension because teams don't get their usual long 3 practices to actually feel out the track. They get 1 practice to warm up, and then we get going. So a lot can happen over this weekend. And it's not just F1. Formula 2, like with Miami, is here as well. So again, if you think of the Miami schedule, we're pretty much the same here in Montreal, just further up north, same time zone. So yeah, it's a Formula 2 sprint weekend as well. And that means our boy Colton Herta will be driving. So if I had to boil Canada down into one sentence, I'd say this. Montreal is a fast, unforgiving, old school feeling race, but on a modern calendar. It's got history, it's got iconic moments, it's got walls, and it's got heavy braking. And it's got a constant feeling that one mistake can change a whole weekend. Add a sprint format on top of that, and suddenly you've got potentially one of the best race weekends of the year. And that's why Canada always feels important. Not just because it's a classic race, but because this place tends to expose people. Drivers get exposed, teams get exposed, brake packages get exposed, setup choices get exposed. If you're quick here, people believe you. If you're shaky here, everyone sees it. And coming after the recent run of races and all the storylines across the grid, this feels like the perfect place for Formula One to show us who actually has their act together. All right, now that we've set the table for Canada as an event, let's talk about the actual 2026 Formula One storylines coming into this weekend. Because Montreal feels like a real checkpoint race. We've had 4 Grand Prix so far, Mercedes won them all, Miami showed that the field might be closing up a little, and now we head to a circuit that tends to expose people quickly. Add in the fact that this is the first sprint weekend Canada has ever had, and suddenly the pressure goes up across the board. There's not much time to hide, not much time to guess, and not much time to recover if you miss the setup. The biggest story, obviously, is Mercedes. More specifically, whether anybody's actually going to stop them. They've already won all 4 Grand Prix so far this season, and George Russell did not win the majority of them. Kimi Antonelli currently leads George Russell by 20 points, and Antonelli is now chasing a 4th win in a row. In the last 3 races, Antonelli went from pole to win in all 3 races. No rookie or sophomore or someone this young has ever done this in Formula One. It's a huge deal on its own. So we're no longer talking about some fun rookie storyline. We're talking about a kid. We're talking about a kid who already looks like a guy at the center of the season. And the scary part for the rest of the field is that he does not look overwhelmed by any of it. And he just keeps getting more comfortable. But what's also interesting inside Mercedes is that George Russell has very much not gone away. Not even close. In fact, if there's one place on the calendar where you would expect George Russell to strike back, it's Montreal. He won here last year from pole. He set the fastest lap, and generally looks like a driver who understands how to attack this circuit. He said so himself. So one of the biggest Canada storylines is not just can Mercedes stay on top, it's also can Russell stop Antonelli from fully taking over the team's narrative. Because if Antonelli makes it 4 in a row, the conversation gets louder, a lot louder. And Mercedes is not just showing up hoping momentum carries them. They're bringing in their first upgrade package of the season to Canada. This is incredibly scary that Mercedes has done so well and they have yet to bring upgrades anywhere. This is their first upgrade of the season. And that matters because Miami suggested that the front gap had started to come down a little, but that's because Mercedes did not even bring an upgrade to Miami. So Canada becomes this really important read on Mercedes. Are they still a benchmark once everybody starts bringing more answers? Or was Miami actually other teams closing in on them? The clearest team trying to answer this question is still Ferrari. They come into Canada sitting second in the Constructors' Championship. But they're already 70 points behind Mercedes, which is the kind of gap that gets dangerous early if you don't do something about it. Ferrari has been good enough to stay in the fight, good enough to hang around the podium, and good enough to look like the nearest challenger a lot of weekends. But they're not sharp enough to really turn Mercedes' life upside down. So for Ferrari, Canada is definitely about converting respectable into threatening. And that's why I think Ferrari has one of the most important weekends on the grid, because Mercedes clearly is the leader, but Ferrari is supposed to be the team most capable of making that leadership uncomfortable. Charles Leclerc has kept them relevant. Lewis Hamilton still brings massive Canada history with him. And this is a brake-heavy, confidence-heavy circuit where drivers can still matter a lot. So if Ferrari wants to prove the title fight is not already slipping, Montreal feels like the kind of place where it has to show something a lot more forceful. So the team I'd be maybe the most curious about coming into Canada would be McLaren. Because McLaren has come out of Miami looking more alive than they have all season. They had the best weekend they've had so far this season. They won the sprint, put Norris on second, Piastri in third in the Grand Prix, scored 48 points over the weekend, and left Florida with just 16 points behind Ferrari in the Constructors. Way to bounce back, McLaren. Huge swing. But more than that, it makes Canada feel like the first true follow-up test. Was Miami the start of a real comeback, or was it just one really good weekend after a huge upgrade package? And I think that's what makes McLaren such a good Canada storyline. They do not need to win the race for this weekend to feel meaningful. They didn't win Miami, but I think they won Miami. They need to prove that Miami step was real. Norris said that the upgrades gave the car more grip. Piastri said that the gap to Mercedes has clearly closed. And the team itself sounded genuinely encouraged. Canada is where you really find out whether that belief survives in a very different circuit. Like Miami is all spectacle and a big traction zone. Montreal is more like heavy braking, curbs, and punishment. So if McLaren is strong again here, then suddenly the season gets a lot more interesting and puts them much further into the mix, which they already are. And then there's Red Bull. And honestly, this is still one of the strangest stories on the grid. Max Verstappen remains one of the biggest names in the sport, and he's a 3-time Canada winner. So on paper, this should be a weekend where people feel nervous about him. They should be thinking he's going to win. But the reality is messier. Red Bull's not coming into Canada looking like its old evil empire. They're coming in here still trying to prove that they can even stabilize the car and the team mood long enough to become a normal front runner again. That's a huge shift from what we used to expect from them and from Max Verstappen. Now, there are at least a couple reasons Red Bull are still worth watching, though. 1, Canada has traditionally been a good place for Verstappen. 2, the team did look a little more alive in Miami than it had earlier in the season. They looked good. And 3, there's always the chance that a track like Montreal, where driver confidence, braking aggression, and race chaos can help a team punch above where it really belongs, especially when you have the best driver in the world. But I still think the broader Red Bull storyline is the same. Until they show a clean, convincing weekend again, they are a team under suspicion, not a team under control. And then there's the wider theme hanging over all of this. Canada is the first sprint weekend after a 3-week break and a rules tweak. And that means that this race should tell us a lot about who actually used the last few weeks well and who's upgraded correctly. Mercedes is bringing upgrades. McLaren believes its new upgrade package is real. Ferrari is trying and needs to stop its points bleed. And Red Bull needs to look coherent again because Canada is such a punishing and reactive circuit that it tends to expose most teams faster than some of the cleaner modern venues do. And that's why the weekend is so important. Cadillac. So Canada feels like a really interesting weekend for Cadillac, not because anybody should be expecting fireworks. I don't think anyone is expecting fireworks. You shouldn't be. And not because this is some magic track where they're about to leap into the points. Let's not get ahead of ourselves. But Montreal is the kind of circuit that can tell you very clearly whether a team has actually moved forward or not. So remember when I was talking about Montreal being a checkpoint? It very much so is for Cadillac. Because we're at our 5th race. We've had a lot of upgrades. The Cadillac just recently brought a very good package to Miami, and it looked pretty good. So here's where we can find out if the Cadillac team has actually made the progress. So the first realistic expectation for Cadillac this weekend is pretty simple. A clean execution. That might not sound sexy, but it matters. Sprint weekends are brutal for new teams because there's no long runway to slowly discover the setup. Remember, just one practice. If the car isn't sorted early, the whole thing can get compressed fast. So when I look at Canada, the first thing I think is I want Cadillac to have a solid Friday. No weird technical drama, no big self-inflicted mistakes, no old habits killing the weekend before it really gets started. Get through practice, understand the balance, hit sprint qualifying in a decent window, and give yourselves a platform to perform. The second expectation is that Cadillac should look more comfortable over the curbs and braking zones than they did earlier in the season. Cadillac themselves have reported that they are bringing an update to Canada specifically to assist in these areas. The latest package includes new front brake drums, diffuser trims, and winglets, as well as front torsion bars aimed at improving how the car rides steep curves at the Circuit Gilles Villeneuve. So like I said, these are specific upgrades for this track, which is very interesting. It's a very different kind of upgrade, and I actually like that. It tells you that the team isn't just chasing abstract lap time, and it's looking at the actual demands of the next circuit and trying to make the car a little more usable in places where Canada can punish you. It shows that the team is growing, that it's preparing race by race now. And that matters because Montreal is a track where confidence shows. And if the driver trusts the brakes, trusts the rear on the traction, and trusts the car over the curbs, the laps come to them. If not, then the whole thing can get clumsy fast. So for Cadillac, Canada is not really about chasing fantasy. It's about seeing whether the car looks a little more composed in the exact kind of moments that expose weakness. Do they attack under the chicanes better? Do they look a little nervous over the curbs? Do the braking zones feel more under control? That's the kind of progress I'm looking for. And then comes the bigger picture expectation, which is pace relative to the teams in Cadillac's actual neighborhood. They do not need to beat giants this weekend. They need to keep making themselves less lonely at the back. If they can stay close enough to Aston Martin, Audi, or Williams, and they're a real part of scraps instead of their own isolated race, then that matters. And on a track like Canada, where a safety car or one strategic moment can scramble things fast, just being in the conversation longer gives you a chance. Cadillac does not need a miracle here. It needs relevance. And I think that's the right emotional frame for the weekend, too. Miami gave the team another double finish, both cars finished, a visible upgrade step, and more signs that the product is moving in the right direction without pretending that the breakthrough has already happened. Canada should be about building on that, not forcing the story, not overhyping results, not expecting too much, just proving what they found in Miami can travel to a very different kind of circuit and still make the car a little more raceable. Now, I also want to use a minute here to talk about Colton Herta, because like I said, we are having a Formula 2 weekend, and that means Colton Herta will be driving. I want you guys to remember that Colton Herta is part of this Cadillac journey. He is our link, our bridge to having an American driver, American team, American engine one day. So this means if you care about Cadillac as an American motorsport project, you should care about what Colton is doing too. He is one of the names sitting in the orbit of the whole building. And as the Cadillac story grows, I think the audience should start training itself to keep one eye on the present and one eye on the future. So you guys gotta remember, we have Perez and Bottas, which is awesome. But you gotta remember, we want Colton in that seat. So my clean Cadillac read for Canada is this. Get through Friday clean, make the car look more settled over the curbs and under braking. Stay in touch with the teams around you and keep building credibility. I'm not expecting points. I'm not expecting Q2. It's a very difficult track, but I am expecting us to hold our own, finish the race with both cars.
Every part of that race, so good.
Now, this is a very special weekend because while it may not be a Formula One race, we have two races on the same day. One is the Canadian Grand Prix, and the other is arguably the biggest race in the world not on the F1 calendar. So we're gonna take a few minutes and talk about the Indianapolis 500.
Drivers, start your engines!
This year is the 110th running of the Indianapolis 500, and it's on Sunday, May 24th, and it's still what it has always been at its core. 200 laps, 500 miles, 33 cars on a 2.5-mile oval at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. They don't call it the greatest spectacle in racing for nothing. And the history's real. The first Indy 500 was run in 1911, and that means this race has more than a century of weight behind it. It's not some gimmick. It's not some sideshow. It's definitely not just cars turning left. That would be a circle race. This is an oval race. And it's one of the greatest foundational events in the world of motorsports. It sits in the same conversation as the Monaco Grand Prix and the 24 Hours of Le Mans when people talk about the biggest races on earth. That alone should tell Formula One fans that this isn't something to laugh off. And I also want to take a moment here to defend the oval, because I think people who don't watch it or understand it miss what makes it so hard and what makes it so awesome. Yes, it's an oval, not a circle. Turning left the whole time would be a circle. This is an oval. Yes, they're making 4 left turns, but that's just a lazy way to describe it. The real way to describe it is this. It's one of the fastest major races in the world with qualifying speeds this year at over 232 miles per hour. And you're doing that in traffic, in dirty air, with tiny margins, over and over and over again. This is not easy. This is certainly not boring. This is violence managed with precision. And honestly, the way I explain it to F1 fans is this. Imagine taking the kind of commitment when you do a big send into turn 1 and make that the whole race. Because that's what this is. That's why I laugh when people try to dismiss it. The oval race is basically big send down turn 1 for 500 miles. That's the whole idea. It's a combat race. Wheel to wheel, who's got balls, who's braking later, who's going faster. You're living in that zone of commitment, risk, and momentum the whole race. So no, I'm not here for any oval disrespect. As much as I love Formula One, I respect the oval. If anything, Indy deserves more appreciation because the challenge is so specific and so relentless. And if you want the Formula One connection, there's a few big ones. First, this race is still part of the Triple Crown of motorsports. Like I said, it's in the same conversation as the other two races, the Monaco Grand Prix and the 24 Hours of Le Mans. Second, Formula One champions and F1 level names have absolutely cared about this race for decades. Drivers like Jim Clark, Graham Hill, Mario Andretti, Emerson Fittipaldi, and Jacques Villeneuve all connect those two worlds. They've all won on both levels. And Graham Hill's Indy 500 win is a huge part of why he remains the only driver to complete the Triple Crown. Because many drivers have the Le Mans and Monaco, and not the Indy 500. This isn't some fake connection people invented later. The Indy 500 has been crossing paths with Formula One's greatness for generations. And beyond the names, I think the connection is philosophical too. Formula One is one kind of elite. The Indy 500 is another. F1 is about being the best in the most global, technical, politically intense series in the world. Indy's about mastering one of the purest and most terrifying single-day challenges in motorsports. Both count. Both matter. They're just different flavors of greatness. So when F1 fans look at Indy and go, hey, not for me, fine. But don't confuse not my thing with not serious, because the Indy 500 is very serious. And there's also something really cool about the fact that it lands on the same broad motorsports weekend as Formula One. It's part of why the Indy 500 always feels bigger than just an American race. It's a centerpiece event, and it's one of the sport's great weekends. It's got scale, ritual, history, and speed. This year's race has already sold out its reserved seats, which tells you the appetite is still massive. So if you're the kind of fan who says you love racing, this is one of those events you should at least understand and appreciate. So my simple pitch is this. The Indy 500 is cool as hell. It matters. And oval racing deserves more respect than it gets. It's not lesser than Formula One. It's not dumb because it's an oval. It's just a different kind of knife fight. Faster than most people realize, riskier than a lot of casual fans understand, and rich with history. So if you're watching Canada this weekend, great. But if you really want to embrace the full motorsport weekend, give some love to the Indy 500 too. Because the 500 is not just another race. It's one of the races.
Let's go, boys.
And there you have it, folks. That is the Canadian Grand Prix and Indy 500 preview. Join us next week where we will review the Canada Grand Prix and we'll discuss news all across the grid, including your Team Cadillac. Peace out.